All right, welcome to the Scent Bubble. I am your host for the afternoon. Well, late evening, actually. You guys know how I do. Check this out. Today we're doing a part 2 video to 5 new fragrances from the house of Yom Layl. These fragrances are brought to you courtesy of Greenly. He's a viewer on the channel, good friend of mine. He provided the last 5 fragrances that we covered. And just for those of you who are just now tuning in, maybe for the first time, this is a part 2 to this series. I don't know how long we're going to go, but as long as Greenly keeps providing these fragrances, I'm going to keep reviewing them. He wanted to see how close I thought they were to the inspirations, as well as just kind of evaluate them for the channel and for you guys who might be considering fragrances from this house. We're going to expedite the intro here. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty about the house and how they curate and allow you to customize and curate your own fragrance experience based off of inspirations of not clones, but designer and niche fragrances. Definitely refer back to the first video to get a true intro on the house. We're just going to talk about 5 new fragrances you guys haven't heard of and may want to consider. So without further ado, I got myself a water, coffee, 5 fragrances, as well as this little treasure map here that explains which fragrances are which, and let's get right into it. So first fragrance, again, I didn't curate this at all. I'm just grabbing at random. And this fragrance is called Sabz. And this is, I believe, a Parfums de Marly Greenly inspiration. So let's, without further ado, get it cracking. And I'll try not to spray this sample into my coffee. Gonna load it up here. 3-4 sprays. I want to get the test strip nice and soaked so we can actually get a good dose of the fragrance. Again, this isn't on skin, so I tend to let people know that a lot of times when stuff gets on skin, formulations can break down, they can kind of maintain, they can warm up and things like that. So definitely consider that this isn't what I would call a true full review, since I didn't have a wearing experience with these fragrances, but I'll go ahead and do follow-up videos on that. But I do think, as much as people complain about fragrance reviewers not getting a wearing experience or anything like that, which a lot of them do, including myself, but it's just some videos won't call for that. It's still important to have love at first sniff. If you are indecisive about a fragrance upon the opening, more than likely you just don't even like the fragrance, and you will only like it, you will only hate it less by having it on skin. But there have been maybe 1 or 2 fragrances in my journey that I was on the fence about, that I didn't necessarily fall in love with, but I appreciated it more when I actually put it to skin. So just keep that in mind. This is supposed to give you an initial thoughts to help you evaluate if you might even mildly be interested in a fragrance like this. So Parfums de Marly Greenly inspiration called Sabz, S-A-B-Z. Let's get straight to it. Okay, so I like this one a lot more comparatively to the Green Irish Tweed inspiration that we tried on part 1. So definitely refer to that. I think I gave it about a 7 in terms of quality, perhaps an 8, but I think 7 sounds about right to me. This smells a lot better. This is like your common slight synthetic green note that you might get in something like Viktor and Rolf's Night Vision or Coach Green. It's got a very, not necessarily a candy apple green type of note, but it leans that way. It's almost light Jolly Rancher with a bit of some naturals. So it does smell somewhat real, but not all the way. It's kind of got a little ramp of synthetic sweetness that kind of comes off like a Jolly Rancher in the freshest way possible, if that makes sense. I can tell here that the projection and sillage will probably be around 3-4 feet. So moderate. It'll leave a good trail. This fragrance isn't going to be one that jumps across the room, but it's going to be one that when you walk by people, they're going to appreciate it. I think for the synthetic green type of DNA that I come across with a lot of designer fragrances, at least, I don't get them as much in niche fragrances such as Parfums de Marly. But, you know, Greenwich Village, Lafayette Street, those type of things. And then on the designer side, Coach Green, Night Vision, etc. These type of fragrances, I think this one stands out to be more photoreal, more natural. And honestly, I give it a strong 8. Again, I think my reason for not really hiking it up to a 9 or a 10 just comes from the fact that there's not a lot of complexity to a fragrance like this, and it just lacks a little bit of the signature that I'm looking for when giving a fragrance a 9 or a 10. But the performance is there. Out of many green fragrances that I've tried, this almost feels like a ramped up, more high quality, better performing version of something like Banana Republic's Grasslands. So definitely, if you've put your nose to that, maybe that'll get you in the wheelhouse of it, even something like a Vintage Green 78. But this actually smells almost identical. I'm just staring at the bottle over here in the corner. Almost identical to Grasslands, but just a higher quality, stronger projection, sits in the air a little bit longer. But this is definitely, I would call it a freshie with charm. Probably at any season, any reason type of fragrance, and it's definitely ageless. This doesn't really have a maturity to it. It is playful with a slight bit of sophistication, and for that I give it an above average 8, just because I think the quality is a little bit better than typical fragrances in this kind of synthetic green category that I'm familiar with. It does have about a 45% kind of naturalness to it that I appreciate, and that makes the fragrance smell a little bit more ramped up. So 8 out of 10 for me there. Moving along to the next fragrance. Okay, this next fragrance is called Stark Vision, and my little roadmap here says that that is a Louis Vuitton Imagination inspiration. So let's dive, Imagination Inspiration. And we're going to give this 3-4 sprays and dive right into it. I'm really enjoying my experience with this house so far. They do have quality. That's something to pay attention to. It's got, I wouldn't really call it niche so far. Maybe it's just because of the DNAs that the fragrances I've smelled so far are copying. However, this is at the very least in the designer category, maybe even a little bit more natural and fresher. Like even the fragrances that nail the DNA closer than others still kind of have this more organic feel to them. So hopefully that helps you out as well. That organic, more natural feel doesn't necessarily take away from performance. It just changes the way that the DNA feels. It feels fresher, a little bit lighter, but definitely still has some. So far, all these fragrances feel like moderate performers. I haven't really come across like a beast mode fragrance yet, or a fragrance that I feel would evaporate. So they're all pretty mid-tier there. Okay, so let me explain to you guys my experience so far with Imagination. I've smelled Original Imagination. As far as the clone category is concerned, I haven't gone through a lot of them because there are so many Imagination clones. And for those of you who haven't smelled Imagination, it's kind of like this citrus medley with aquatics, you know, grapefruit. Like it's kind of got like a fruit basket type feel, like grapefruit, apple, orange, lemon, lime. Just a big basket of fruits, similar to Bulgari's Tigar, similar to Elysium. It just kind of has a slightly expensive, luxurious take on a very simple, freshy with charm basket of citrus on water type of DNA. Something you wear on the beach or a boat or a party or a hotel. Very playful, but with a little spritz of expensive luxury feel. As far as my experience with inspirations of this fragrance, obviously I've smelled Intimation, which this smells extremely close to, and I think I got Intimation for less than $15 for 120 ml of juice, and I think that's the most bottom tier entry level clone. So off the bat, I want to give a fragrance like this like a 7 just for being average. Intimation is a good fragrance, but on the quality tier list, it sits at the entry point. And this smells exactly like that. To me, my favorite clone to date of Imagination is going to be Ardal Zafran's Sahib Intense. I just think it has a layer of complexity to it that the other clones don't have. And for that reason, it's almost like a parfum version of a lot of these clones, which come off very eau de toilette, very loud in the opening, and then they dry down to virtually a skin scent after like 4 hours. The actual Imagination doesn't, but most of you guys, with it, my opinion is this: the DNA is so simple, I wouldn't want 100 ml of such an expensive fragrance for this style of DNA, because you're not really paying for anything other than maybe a little bit of extra performance, not necessarily quality, because most clones kind of nail this DNA at least 90% to me. I give this about a 6 or a 7, guys. I lean towards going down to a 6 just because there's so many clones of this DNA that I would be expecting more from a house like this that kind of charges a mid-tier $40 to $60 price point. So it's a bit of a letdown to me. But in terms of quality, comparatively to like Intimation Sahib Intense, I give it about a 7 for very average. So not the best fragrance there. I personally wouldn't recommend it. I think there's too many other more affordable inspirations out there. Moving along, we have, it has an L apostrophe impossible. So Lim Possible. And this is a clone of, we should say inspiration. I don't know how the legal side of things are with all that clonery in the perfume world. But L'Impossible is in Louis Vuitton L'Immensité inspiration. So let's go ahead and check that out. I'm going to grab some coffee real quick. I'm going to try to make this not too long of a review, guys. I do want to fly through these for you. Hit it with 4 sprays. L'Immensité I know to be a similar type of DNA. I've said this before. I believe the perfumer for a lot of the LV fragrances is the same perfumer of the Issey Miyake fragrance line, which tends to have a lot of citrus-based fragrances as well. So I believe L'Immensité to be a stronger, more zesty, almost warm, spicy, but still cooling type of beach citrus. And yeah. So the only clone I'm familiar with this is Jean Lowe's Immortelle or Immortal, and this is just this is actually better than Jean Lowe's Immortelle. So I think you're gonna have to compare the price and see if it's worth pulling the trigger, spending a little bit more money. I think for Jean Lowe's fragrance, I paid probably $25-30 after shipping, and it's probably even cheaper now. TikTok Shop, you could probably get it for $20-25 with shipping. So this smells like that, but a lot fresher. Again, sometimes the fresh organic feel of these fragrances plays into their favor on certain DNAs. In this case, with the citrus, the warm, spicy, still kind of a beach vibe, but definitely a more zingy citrus than the Imagination inspiration and Imagination as a DNA in general. I actually give this a strong 8. I don't lean into the 9 or 10 category simply because it's not super signature. It's very playful. It is versatile, but the performance seems very mid to mid-low range here. But as far as the L'Immensité DNA, I think they've done a pretty spectacular job. Definitely not signature worthy off the DNA, but in terms of closeness, I probably give it about an 8 or a 9, but overall as a fragrance, in terms of interest and intrigue, projection, sillage, all that good stuff, versatility, I give it about a high ranking 8. But I don't do decimals here, guys, so we round up or down here. Yeah, I can't believe how natural the richness of that kind of warm, spicy citrus feels on this fragrance. Again, the fact that it's a little bit more organic makes it feel better. But I think over time when this dries down, it may start to break apart and the skin might play an influence into a fragrance like this. But again, so far with all these fragrances, I would say these are 6 to 10 spray fragrances. You're going to want to load up with these fragrances. But thankfully, since they come in these like, you know, I don't know if this is a 10, 20, or 30 ml vial or whatever. It looks like more like a 10 or a 20. It seems like you can just put it in your pocket and go, but they are quite delicate, even though they're high quality. So I give that an 8 out of 10, just due to DNA and a little bit of the performance, a little bit of lack of signature. Let's move on. Next fragrance is Elm Street. Is that Lafayette? Yeah, Elm Street is Bond No. 9's Lafayette Street. So let's see what that's hitting for. I do have Lafayette Street over here, so this will be interesting to see how it stacks up with the original Bond No. 9. Bond No. 9 is really tricky for me because I almost feel like Bond No. 9 is no longer considered a niche house in terms of me personally. I feel like a lot of their fragrances lean a bit synthetic feeling. They still keep the luxury feel and have some sophistication to them and potency, but I just feel like as a DNA as a whole, in terms of things I'm looking for with a niche fragrance, in terms of layering, complexity, performance, unique DNA, these seem to just be not Yom Layl, but Bond No. 9 as a house just seems to be chasing a lot of already out there DNAs and just making them fresher. So that's something to keep in mind. But they are quality. Man, this smells extremely close to like I don't know if it's Greenwich Village or the Green Irish Tweed one, just a little bit sweeter. It is Lafayette Street, just again a little bit fresher, slightly less dense, but more photo real, more juicy, earthy, fresh. But you know, it's got, again, it's kind of got a synthetic green, almost with a spearmint or a mint. It doesn't, not minty or spearminty in the cooling sensation, but just in that kind of like, there's a cold air under this fragrance, under like a synthetic green note that leans sweet rather than zesty or zingy. Easy to wear spring, summer, but I think you can go any season, any reason, but it's a lighter fragrance, so typically I would rock that in spring, summer. Again, I give this an 8. I think it is above average when you look at the Lafayette Street clones. But just in terms of interest factor, it's just not blowing me away. But in terms of accuracy, they've done a phenomenal job here. Accuracy alone, I give it a 9. But again, DNA, performance, stuff I've smelled before in the inspiration category, I just give it a strong 8. If we were doing decimals, I'd say 8.5 or something like that. But definitely something to consider if you do like those Coach Greens, night vision-y type of fragrances. Lafayette Street, Greenwich Village. There's one other one that I'm missing. Green Irish Tweed. That's more earthy than synthetic green, but it's still got the green. Again, Grasslands, Vintage Green 78. In that wheelhouse, but fresher, more organic feel. Okay, last but not least, we have Midnight. Is this Grand Soir? Yes, Maison Francis Kurkdjian Grand Soir inspiration here. And to close out the review, let's see what this is hitting for. Maison Francis Kurkdjian's Grand Soir is one of my favorite fragrances of all time in the vanilla category. It is so simple. Creamy, warm, slight powdery, juicy, succulent, unique, non-synthetic, almost warm, spicy, vanilla, amber fragrance, straight to the point. But it is one of the most seductive fragrances of all time. Many women absolutely love this DNA on a man. And vanilla is a hard sell for me. I don't gravitate towards vanilla fragrances because I feel like they're too vanilla dominant and they rely on just a prominent vanilla accord. And they don't really spend a lot of time on dressing up what's around it, which is where I think the allure is with vanilla in terms of making a fragrance that somebody hasn't made before. However, Grand Soir is the exception that I make. It is just such a good rendition of vanilla and just a finesse masterclass with just the warm, spicy, and the amber that just makes it cream of the crop. You know, it's like the best steak you can get. There's other cuts of meat that are just as nice and great, but you know, when it's all said and done, this one's just kind of the top tier Wagyu version of vanilla for me. Okay, so this one kind of sits right off the bat. I'm going to give it a 9 comparatively to everything I've tried in the line so far, and this is fragrance number 10. It isn't Grand Soir to a T. Those of you guys know I carry the clone of Lattafa's Eternal Oud, which is more in the same way that Dior Homme Parfum is a more dusty, fresher, in the air iris comparatively to the warm, buttery, creamy, lipsticky iris from Dior Homme Intense. In the same way, Lattafa's Eternal Oud is kind of a more dustier version of Grand Soir. And this isn't quite either or. This sits right in the middle. It does have a creamy, more of a heavy, warm, ambery, powdery density, not necessarily a warm, buttery, creamy density to it, but it isn't so fresh and almost spicy out there like Eternal Oud because it does have some weight to it. It's just not a buttery weight. It's a powdery weight. So I call it somewhere in the middle of Eternal Oud and Grand Soir. It's fresh. I think it probably doesn't perform nearly as good as Grand Soir because it doesn't have that density. But again, I think at best you'll probably get 6 to 8 hours of performance out of this. This is a winter fall fragrance, ageless. I would wear it any season, any reason. During hot weather, I would just wear it indoors or at night. But this is the ultimate date night fragrance. There's nothing really playful to it. It's just nice and seductive and sophisticated, but simple, but somehow still rich smelling. So this is just a slightly more organic feel. Again, I don't know how Grand Soir nails that butteriness. Like, the density to that vanilla is unlike anything in Noir Extreme, Spice Bomb Extreme, you know, anything. Sauvage, I think they might have a little bit of vanilla in there. Angel Share, anything from Jean-Paul Gaultier, Clone World, you know, Kamrakawa, Kamra, just anything with a vanilla note in it. Nothing strikes me with the same level of detail as Grand Soir has. And so I think for that reason, it's hard for people to nail that DNA. They're always just going to be a little too fresh. And this fragrance makes fresher renditions of clones. So that makes sense that they kind of went off beaten path. I'm not sure if it's just better ingredients means that you're getting less performance, and because of that, you're getting less density to the fragrance. But you know, who knows? They're I give it a 9 only because it's modeling Grand Soir and it does it pretty well. In terms of accuracy, I only give it an 8 out of 10. But in terms of the DNA, the performance, and the overall fragrance DNA and utility, I'm giving it a 9. I think this is up there as one of the better ones I've smelled yet. And it is very nice. I will say upon dry down, it does kind of creep into the category of Carlisle or Cassius, closer to Cassius, which is the clone of Carlisle, because the warm spiciness starts to creep up. And when you have the vanilla and the warm spicy, it kind of leans toward that apple pie feel that Cassius provides, which, believe it or not, Eternal Oud also does. So it does kind of start to steer off more in the 80% closeness the further into the dry down, but it's still a good seductive date night cold weather DNA. Okay, so there you have it, guys. We covered Stark Vision, LV Imagination, Elm Street, which is Bond number 9, Lafayette Street, L'Impossible, which was L'Immensité from LV, Midnight, which was Grand Soir, we just did that one, and lastly Sabz, which was Parfum de Marly Greenly. So overall, these were either average or slightly above average, with Grand Soir taking the cake today, you know, the Grand Soir inspiration. Overall, so far with this house, I think on average their fragrances are 8s out of 10. So it really comes down to just picking good DNAs. If you're dealing with a more naturally fresh type of fragrance, then I would either go with the originals or just pick some of the more popular clones that you see online. You don't need to pay the extra money to smell slightly more dusty or slightly more fresh. But yeah, they do seem to be a quality house, but they're not blowing me away like the need to pay a mid-tier price for the inspiration still. So yeah, it really just comes down to would be probably a solid house to go with more of their cold weather based fragrances. The Chanel Allure Homme Sport inspiration was really nice from what I remember. But yeah, I think going with fresher fragrances, you're probably going to get less performance than the originals by about 30-40%. So you would want to lean on a cold weather, dominantly sweeter fragrance, so that even though it's a fresher take on it, you're still at least going to get 6 to 8 hours of performance. But overall, they are averaging about 8, and they have a couple of stars so far. Hopefully we get a few more fragrances from them to try out. It's definitely been interesting. I love their packaging and presentation. It's very top-notch. You can curate your own experience, and the house overall seems very interesting. But I think they have some work to do in terms of going to the drawing board and simply offering something more than more quality perfumery and the experience. At the end of the day, the fragrances have to provide something that is reminiscent or close to the originals, and at the very least respectable even in their nuances. And people don't always like something to be lighter or fresher or more natural smelling. This house would be very good for people who like a more organic, lighter. People are getting on me for using the term sissy sprayer, but if you spray, you know, less than 3 sprays of a fragrance or something like that, this house might be very good for you, because everything's going to sit kind of subtly in around a 2 to 3 feet of projection range. Nothing's really singing to me yet across the room. But anyways, that was from the house of Yom Layl, guys. I'm your host, The Scent Bubble. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. More importantly, turn on that notification bell and let me know. Have you tried anything from this house? And what are your thoughts on it? Or if you have any questions about it that I haven't resolved in this video, put it in the comments section below. I talk back. With that being said, y'all have a blessed week. Peace.